All right.
Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you again. My name is Jessica Maitri, and this is Denise, and we have our first guest that we're really excited about. This is Travis, and we do these videos mostly for our Facebook group called Therapy with a Cherry on Top. But we are wanting to branch out to members of this group specifically to discuss topics that we don't normally discuss in depth. So this is our first guest. So thanks for being here, Travis. We're excited to have you. Would you mind doing like a little brief intro of you and anything you want us to know? Would that be cool?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to go with intros anymore. Yeah, I don't know. My name's Travis. Let's see. I've had quite a long journey, in my opinion, I suppose, of working towards embodiment and spiritual anything, to be honest. And so the last 2 years has really been where it's all started to culminate more, and where a lot of my lessons have really had to be learned, or a lot of the wisdoms like started to sink in. So yeah, and currently, I mean, I'm a massage therapist as well, do a lot of work with the body, and obviously the emotions, the mental aspects as well. So yeah, so I feel like I relate obviously very well to you, Jess, with what you do as well, mind, body, spirit. So.
Well, we specifically asked Travis to talk to us today about the we wanted the perspective from a male around oppression. And so this group is specifically, you know, we branch out into lots of different topics, but specifically wanting to look at just other angles and other viewpoints on how oppression shows up, specifically for men, but also would love to, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit about how it's shown up in your life personally, and then also just how you observe that showing up from the male perspective, and anything else that you want to just kind of begin with as far as telling us about how that's shown up for you.
Sure. I suppose my example is probably pretty classical, actually. Like I would take it as far back as middle school is when everything really started to show up. And you know, for me, it was being oppressed by a lot of my classmates. You know, I was always the kid that everyone wanted to make fun of, and I was very quiet. I was very shy and very much to myself, so it was really I was an easy target. And so basically for 3 years in middle school, I pretty much had zero friends. I had like one or two real friends. Everyone else always made my life pretty miserable and would kind of project a lot of their stuff on me, even as children, as kids. So that pretty much actually was the like the major I don't know, the pivotal moment in my life, I guess, where I started taking on conditioning and living from a conditional identity that wasn't true, and living my life for others. And then, ironically enough, that you know, took me into high school, and the same group of kids actually started treating me like a human being again in high school, and I kind of associated a lot of those contexts with what I was accomplishing in high school because I was a natural athlete. And once people started to see that I was good at something, then it seemed like in my mind I correlated that with acceptance. So for me, what's really interesting is looking back in hindsight, I can see how I created all of these false belief systems and these false links with how I needed to show up in the world to be valued, or to even have value. And so with that whole, you know, that oppression within middle school, that literally started to spiral and build my entire adult life on a foundation of oppression from other people. And so that's at least the simple version of it, of course. Like, I mean, I through college, I went through some, let's see, I was a athlete in college and actually was very close to making the Olympic team, and that was a very big passion of mine. And that was another thing that ties into the oppression in middle school, just because it was built on the same foundation. Like once I had the misfortune of not making the Olympic team and exiting college, I literally had no idea what to do with my life at all. The one passion that I actually had was taken away from me, and so with that being said, all of my value was also taken away from me, because that value was built on what I felt others needed to see from me in order for me to have worth, right? And so that's how it all connects. And then I went down this, pretty extensive downward spiral for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years, really. Not very many people really, to be honest, not a lot of people actually know like the depths of what my experience has been, even the people that really know me, because I usually hold myself together pretty well. Just like most of us, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and then basically, went into a series of relationships that really started to poke and prod at these underlying issues, and then I had 2 years ago was my first spiritual awakening, and then I had another one 8 months after that, and this last 2-year process has basically been pretty much fully taking the last 35 years of my life since birth and really taking that chunk and flipping it in front of me, so it's all condensed into one box. So all of that oppression from others has been given back to me to see and to face after actually waking up to what's real. And that was kind of the start of the journey. So I'll kind of leave it there for the moment. And if you have any questions, or if you want to go into specifics, feel free to poke and prod.
Go ahead, Denise. I'll let
I appreciate so much your story, and thank you for sharing, because I feel like oftentimes when we start going through this process of spiritual awakenings and just, being open to more, and then also just looking back on our own journeys, regardless of what we've been through, it always feels so isolating and alone. And to hear your story, I'm sitting there and saying, oh yes, I completely understand where you're coming from. I've been there, done that in a different way, right? Not in exactly the same way, but I relate so much to your story. So I just really appreciate that. And it's such a good reminder that no matter who we are and what we've been through, there's similarities across all of our stories as we start moving through. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things when we're talking about oppression that's really important to hit on, is that it doesn't matter who you are. We all have come from a space of oppression at some point in time. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's I guess I felt like mentioning, seeing as you brought that up, like it's very, that's very much a fact, is that I know we wanted to get into gender roles and masculine, feminine energies and all of these things, and it's kind of ironic that to some degree we're all just playing with a story. We're all playing with these stories that we all have, and like you said, Denise, it's it's very, very much the truth that we're all actually going through the same exact process, regardless of how unique we think that we are as individual creations of human beings. Like we're all going through the same process, and that's one of those that's one of those things that I feel like a lot of us are still soaking in, is that even though we are unique, we're really not. It's the same paradigm of the paradox, the duality of I am everything, but I'm also nothing. Mm-hmm. So we have to work with that balance, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I know we're not doing gender roles specifically, but I do feel like compelled to ask you this question, Travis. Like, if you could give men advice on how to break free of oppression, to put it like simply, what would you tell men?
Wow, yeah, that's a fun question. So I would preface all of that by saying that my advice that I would give to anyone would actually be specifically for anyone. and that's kind of my come from, is that I don't tend to give advice that I would only allocate to a gender, because the way that I see our evolution at this point is it's actually we're all taking total responsibility, or we're being asked to take full responsibility, which means, you know, as we speak of masculine and feminine, it's actually rebalancing and reharmonizing that within ourselves, of course. So it has literally nothing to do with the association that a man is masculine and the female is feminine, right? And I know you guys are both very well aware of that. So so that's where a lot of my advice would stem from anyhow, is really full responsibility is the number one thing that I would even start with from a human standpoint. That even makes sense to me. There's so many different pathways that we can take to move forward, but the only one that's to me seems very viable to see results now is saying, how can I take responsibility for everything in my life, right? Because if you can take full responsibility, you're probably gonna go through some of these struggles, of course, of learning your discernment of what's meant for me and what's not. Where am I supposed to be and where am I not supposed to be? You know, all that comes with discernment, but really it's how do I take responsibility for my reactions, my behaviors, how I show up in life. And, you know, another thing is, moving beyond the me-centric paradigm where everything's about me. It's how can I help, or how can I show up for others more. And a lot of time what gets complicated is when we're actually entangled, right? That's where all the advice and all the practices really get put into use, is when we're entangled. It gets very challenging to actually break out of the entanglement while actually holding good space sometimes. So you actually have to allow yourself to get triggered. You know, like it's actually imperative to allow everything to happen the way it's supposed to. And then you just have to forgive everything as it happens, right? And know that it's supposed to come up. But just keep doing your best, obviously, to hold awareness of becoming the best version of yourself that you can. So we'll kind of start with that.
I really like that. I think so that piece of allowing yourself to be triggered, right? I think when we start through this process, I mean, nobody wants to feel triggered, right? We all do things to escape it. So do I vibe higher? Do I go out and numb some way? What does that look like? And so understanding, I really love that piece, that life is about being triggered. It doesn't matter what stage in life you're in, you have to allow that experience to grow.
Kind of is. Yeah.
Right? And I feel like,
go ahead.
I feel like you bring up, I mean, because oftentimes when we're triggered, we don't even know, like, is it this lifetime stuff? Is it past lifetime? Like, where is this coming from? And that's part of in what I call our soul's process, right? It's that soul process of how I show up in the world as a soul, as a whole embodied person, and move forward. So I appreciate that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's you know, we could probably go on for hours about all sorts of details, but it's, you know, that's one of those old spiritual paradigms also that we're moving beyond, is not to call it out, but the old law of attractions people that are like only positive. You know, so that's one of those things where it's a little taboo to talk about that. Because, oh my God, what happens if you're negative? You're going to manifest a whole negative reality. And it's like, well, I'll tell you what, if that were actually real, I don't think any of us would be here right now.
Exactly. And do you think this process, the more you go through it, the more you realize it's not about vibing high all of the time, because your body can't manage that level of energy all of the time. You have to do this kind of simple thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I like to go on tangents, so thank you.
Oh yeah, feel free. If you want to go off on tangents, trust me, I probably could meet you there in some way, shape, or form. I literally Jess and I have communicated a good amount, I'd say, over the last couple of years. So the extent of like what I've experienced in the last 2 years is pretty phenomenal, even for my own brain to comprehend. So I could probably meet, you know, in terms of conversation, I could meet from like a very basic human level, all the way up through, you know, quantum levels and source levels where everything's an illusion. So I could definitely humor some of that if you have any compelling questions or just topics that you want to cover.
Well, we might get there. We might need several.
Yeah.
I do know that a lot of people in this group specifically have been or are currently going through some, what I would call awakening process, or like Kundalini types experiences. And
Yeah.
all three of us I know have been through that specifically in the last couple of years. And so, yeah, I'm trying to kind of keep it like condensed so we don't lose people, but you know,
Sure.
I don't know what's coming up for you, Travis, around maybe what we could share with people around now.
Well, yeah, to honor what you two wanted to do with the group and everything as well. Like, I know we could make this like a social gathering and just have some fun and cover some really beautiful things that would be helpful. But yeah, to me, I think what I'm feeling is keeping it pertinent to oppression and navigating a lot of that stuff. But yeah, from some of these different stances or viewpoints maybe. And so let's see. So yet again, like from my standpoint, a few of the things that I've learned over the last 2 years, it's so simple. Everything we're doing is so simple, and we make it so complicated. And it's funny because I'm not, you know, it's ironic because I hear myself as an echo of so many other people that have come before me anyhow, right? I'm not sharing anything that's new.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I have something to offer, but at the same time, you know, it's I suppose the more that we all share this and spread the word really and assist each other, the easier it becomes for everybody else to actually move through all this, right? The fact that you and Denise and myself and so many of our acquaintances have actually gone through a lot of this process opens up the space for the energy to be so much less dense. So everyone else can have an easier time and not struggle so much. But I guess what I'd like to share in terms of oppression and value to this video is that, you know, some of the major lessons that I've learned is literally like you can never have the reality that you really, unless you accept the one that is right now as being perfect as it is without needing to change anything. So that's probably my number one. And that's gonna, that alone is gonna make you face every single thing that you think that you are that you're not. And it's also gonna make you face reality in every way that you think reality should be different. So every single aspect of manipulation, control, oppression, illusion, you're gonna have to face all of that. And to me, that's kind of like the true, the tantric path, right? Of surrender, like full surrender to life, and say everything is meant to be exactly as it is right now. Otherwise, it would be different. So if you do that, to me, that's about as simple as it gets. Like you're probably gonna have a lot of experiences that are not fun, but those are gonna teach you your discernment on how to move through life and how to actually come back in touch with your true self, your true state, and learn how to respect other people and see them as the gods that they are, you know, and the fact that we're all the same. We come from the same thing. And so pretty much that in itself heals all aspects of separation if you're willing to take responsibility and meet yourself there, you know.
How do you think, what do you think relationships are moving into looking like, Travis?
Sorry, the audio was a little quieter right there.
Oh,
Can you say that one more time?
What do you think is being asked of relationships right now? Like, what do you observe or feel is going to start happening?
Man, That's that's a deep question, because what I would tell you is that I feel like, I don't know, from my own experience and what I see, I feel like relationships are almost the new platform to create a like a more of a collective source centered, or like singular awareness between all of us. Relationships are actually healing all of the paradigms and the traumas that we can't heal individually, because that kind of brings me back to sovereignty, you know, and what's sovereignty, what's empowerment. Because the thing is, and yet again, relating it to oppression again, which is perfect. So full circle is that healing your oppression from others is step number one, but that's certainly not even remotely all of it. Because obviously everything, you know, we oppress ourselves. So that's what's so great about the triggering, and that's what's so great about relationships, especially nowadays, is that if you're single, it's really easy to be single and do the work and think that you're sitting pretty and you're perfectly fine and you're embodied. But as soon as and then you walk around and you're like, oh wow, yeah, I'm sovereign, right? So cool, I've made it, like I'm sovereign. No, that's another paradigm, is that where we're moving to, we don't accomplish things. We don't need to accomplish anything. So the person who's accomplishing it is an ego identity that also needs to dissolve. So that's what relationships are there for, which luckily everything in life is a relationship. But the intimate relationships are going to excavate that deeper quality. And those are the ones that are going to make sure that when we think that we're sovereign, and when we think that we're empowered, and we're still attached to an identity that needs that, the relationships nowadays are going to start to excavate all of that, and really clear out our vessels and clear out our bodies from all those mental constructs, the conditions that remain. And it's really like refining of our ability to hold ourselves as a pure human being that's directly connected with source, as source, where we are able to to meet each other in that same space with the same understanding, so it does become unconditional, right? So that's kind of where I would take that whole conversation. That's what feels really real to me. So hopefully that's helpful and not too far out there.
What do you think, Denise? How are you doing over there?
I'm sitting here going, ooh, that's really edgy stuff, and I like it, and talk more about it, because I think I feel like, so there's this dual kind of thing when you talk about relationship, right? So everybody wants, like, there's always this thought of, for many people, I want to be in a relationship, right? And then for me, my experience has always been, I feel like I get lost in a relationship and I lose my sense of self in a relationship. And kind of what you're talking about is there's that like really beautiful space in relationship where you create something more, and it's not losing yourself, it's not being a complete sovereign being, but it's this combination. So will you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. From my perspective, like I said, it's what feels very real to me based off of my own direct experiences and what I've actually had to go through, what I've endured and what I've learned myself. And maybe it's relevant to some people, maybe not. But to me, what makes sense is that, so yes, we're all sovereign, but through my own experiences, like, I feel like I punched through all the illusions like really hard, really fast, which pretty much made me see everything from a perspective of complete non-attachment, like 100%, all cords cut. So what that means to me is that literally created, or it didn't create anything, but it allowed me to actually see and feel in my body and my experience as a human what it's meant to not be identified with anything, literally anything, not even being a person. And it might sound pretty extreme, but truthfully, when we let go of all conditions, that's also the condition that I have an identity that creates my identity. You know, like everything that led up to this moment, like, so my name is Travis. Does that mean anything to me? No. Like, it doesn't mean anything to me. Most people hinge on their names. Their name and their body is actually what they think that they are. That doesn't discount the fact that we have a body, doesn't discount the fact that we utilize it. But all of these things are energetic attachments and cords that we have that we're so unaware of, that condition us to operate on a certain level to meet the needs of those parts or meet the conditions of those parts, rather than from the wholeness of being energetically detached from everything. And what I personally have experienced is that, I mean, to me it seems very obvious, but the more that you understand, or the more that, I'll just try and keep it pointed towards me, right, with my language, the more that I understand that my wants and that my preferences and that all these features of my identity are actually an identity-oriented thing, and I meet those and ask myself, why do I want these things? Can I go without them? And if I actually face that desire for something, I can actually sever the attachment towards positive things as well, which is just as important as the negative attachments. Because what I've seen is that if we sever the attachments to the negative things, then we become state chasers. And then we chase high emotional states, and we chase good feelings, and then we keep disregarding and evading everything else. And so when we sever the attachment to all things, we actually create the space to draw it in and magnetize it. Because now all the bad things are okay, and all the good things are okay. And now once everything's on the same playing field, we actually see everything as beautiful and life is perfect the way it is. And now we can actually magnetize all the good things without being attached to the good things, because we've actually earned it. So that's kind of my perspective. But hopefully I hit like the main points. If you have any more questions that I didn't get specific on per se, feel free to ask.
Well, it seems like what you just said it directly relates to how we oppress ourselves, which is attachments to everything, including the good. And that it's interesting you bring that up too, because that's you think of the word oppression, we're thinking about this virus that's happening right now, right? We're all supposedly oppressed by this thing that no one can see. But like our attachments to even like the way that I've heard so many people say, I can't wait for things to go back to the way that they were before this happened. It's like, well, but that's a way of oppressing yourself. It's a way of keeping yourself oppressed, because that's not what's here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, that's another thing, is at this point, like I would be willing to almost just bet my life on the fact that moving forward, it's impossible to not face ourselves anymore. It's literally impossible. And I'm sure you ladies know that, because you guys are on the front lines also, is that there is no evading. It's only temporary. So we're going to face everything we need to. And the sooner that we accept that and get on board, like the more aligned we become, and the more we allow, and the more we surrender, and essentially become that conscious co-creator with what's happening, even though there's almost 100% uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's very, very important as well.
Mm-hmm. Did you say anything?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I feel like that unattachment and just allowing things to happen, the thing that keeps coming through for me is, and part of what you've spoken to in the conversation, is it doesn't mean that the bad goes away. It doesn't mean the good goes away, but it allows for flow and for co-creation and for ease, right? You get ease even in the difficult when you allow for this kind of a space.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly put, because that's where sometimes like these conversations and the work that we're really truly doing and how things truly operate, that's where it can definitely get very, very misconstrued. And I went through that myself, where I for the longest time, I thought acceptance meant that I needed to have things in my life, and it made me miserable. And then guess what? I learned my discernment of saying, oh, wow, these are actually patterns that I don't need any longer. And I didn't have to push them away anymore. Before, I used to push them away. And that's, that's a force. So if you're going to push with a force, it's going to come back at you, right? There's going to be a counter force to it. So yeah, so it's really, that's what's so beautiful in my eyes about that approach, like you said, of letting everything be. Because when you let everything be, you actually get to see everything for what it is, rather than what you're making of it. Mm-hmm. So, and when you can do that, that's a huge deal, to be honest, to put yourself in a position where you can actually look at everything. And to me, I equate it to my spiritual experience of setting myself on fire. It was like, I was like, all right, you know what? I've experienced some pretty profound things, and I don't know what's real anymore. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to light a match. I'm going to stand on it. And I'm going to just let everything burn. Whatever's left is true.
The Phoenix.
Yeah. I've seen it. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
go ahead, Jess.
No, you go ahead, Denise. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I don't remember what I was gonna say now. So
okay. Well, I was curious to ask a question of you, Travis, that we've asked the group in the past, but from obviously a male gender perspective, how can you discern the feminine versus the masculine energy within yourself? And a lot of men are like, I don't know how to tap into my quote feminine, right? Like any thoughts around that?
Well, let's see. I'll do my best. Because my experience was pretty much like getting cosmically blindsided and getting shoved into the whirlpool. So I just had to learn it, and I had to learn it fast. I just experienced it in complete rewiring. But so everything obviously we're kind of labeling, right? So as long as we're aware that we're labeling things, and that it doesn't mean anything in particular, that's a good place to start. But for me to help with some discernments on masculine and feminine is, I feel like that's been a process for me too. But to me, I consider masculine I would say the divine masculine stuff is more so like the creational action oriented stuff. Anything that's more of a doing is more masculine. It's all movement oriented. But the divine feminine to me would be actually, it's like the glue that holds everything together. And that's the most profound amount of love that you could ever even imagine experiencing, or even imagine holding in your body. So to me, the divine feminine is kind of like our true essence. That's the way I would describe it. It's like, what is our true nature? And to me, that's pure compassion, pure unconditional love, just pure, like embodied, like bliss and ecstasy and just kindness and nurturing and love for others and for everything. The masculine energy is, how do we move things and how do we do things? How do we navigate through life? What are we creating? How do I address you? And then obviously, on top of that, you've got the whole dilemma of approaching what role your mind plays in all of that, right? Because for most people, we're all still working through how to properly utilize our mind as a tool. And so most of the time we have to also understand that, like, a lot of our guidance, I don't really feel like our true guidance comes from our mind. So we always have to be very careful about when we label something, we give our mind something to latch onto and to run with. So when we are trying to do the work, we always have to make sure that, like, if we're thinking too much, we're thinking too hard about, oh, cool, what's the next step? What's the next step? Just stop, right? Just stop, literally just stop and sit there and just go back into silence and, like, really surrender and allow things to, to move on their own. But you can use your mind as a tool to constantly remind yourself of that loving quality, like, and it's not related to affection, right? It's like unconditional love. Like, I see you as God and source and all of creation. You literally are everything that created everything. I am also that. We're all that. And so anything outside of that, we have to be able to use our mind as a tool to remember and kind of to guide us closer towards that as we progress through our process, our healing process, and how we approach and treat each other. And then I suppose in terms of masculine, like as we make our decisions to move through life, use the feminine, like the divine feminine, to nurture that decision and carry that decision forward. So it's a soft decision, you know, like true power, and true power is gentle and it's soft. So that's kind of the way that I would bridge divine masculine and feminine into like what we're going through and how to maneuver it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Denise and we've talked a little bit about this greater invitation for humanity to just be and just sit in stillness and feel and be able to reconnect from this feeling space instead of a planning what's the next step, you know. And so I guess based on what I just heard you say is, you know, a lot of humanity in general are being called to get that divine feminine on board by just being and feeling more right now.
Yeah. That's actually, I mean, in my eyes also, that's actually part of the rebalance of the collective rebalance, is actually the fact that, you know, speaking to oppression yet again, a greater paradigm, like a greater role that's been played, actually has been men oppressing women, gender-wise, as well as the masculine, like the divine masculine energies being out of balance within humanity, right? Because ultimately they're always in perfect balance. Mm-hmm. So there's really nothing to do. But at the same time, in our experience as human beings, of course, like we're going through a process of ourselves, of embodiment, and bringing all of that into balance. And so this stage right now, that to me started, well, I couldn't tell you, but for me anyways, I became aware of it probably a year and a half to 2 years ago, like during the beginning of my awakening process, was when I actually experienced the divine creation, like feminine energy that really is and I wouldn't even call it feminine at that point. It's just the true essence of what literally all creation is. Was so mind-blowing that was kind of my immersion into understanding the new paradigm shift of bringing unconditional love and our true nature like back into form, so that all of our actions are guided from that place. Otherwise, we're working on faulty foundations. You know, it's not balanced and it's not pure. So definitely something we're all moving through right now, is bringing all that divine feminine and just the unconditional love back into everything.
Mm-hmm. Yes, lots of stuff. How are you doing? Anything from you that you'd like to add or questions?
Well, yeah, so here's a thought that keeps coming up, and I'll just put it out there and let you respond. But in my experience, I have just as a woman, and my expectation of men has always been to be oppressive towards me, right? And so I feel like I put them in a space, or I have historically put them in a space of allowing that oppression to occur and kind of put them in that oppressor box. And so I guess, can you speak to that just a little bit, of what it's like to be on the male side of that whole expectation of, you are going to oppress, so you must, and the co-creation of what happens as a result of that.
Oh, that's a fun game to play.
I know, isn't it?
I've done.
Right? You're like, oh, wait a minute, you kind of create it yourself.
Yeah. God, yeah, I know. I obviously apologize in advance, because if I can't be super concise, because it's like there's so much to speak to, but it's trying to keep it very concise is very challenging to me sometimes. But to me, it's always about, at that point, yet again, can we be aware of our patterns? Like, are we even conscious of our patterns? You know, and that's where awareness comes into, like, full responsibility of saying everything is meant for me, like everything is here for a reason. So if I'm running into this resistance, why? You know, what is my role? Not what is your role, what is my role? You know, and so if you're seeing the same patterns looping over and over again, then it's always coming back about, how do I take responsibility? You know, how do I take responsibility? Because what happens is, obviously, so anything that's created, anything that's created or stepped into with a faulty foundation has to crumble over time, right? So theoretically, as a human coming into a relationship, if I already have a notion that someone's out to get me, they're, regardless of what they do, they're out to get me. So I've created that persona, I've created a new identity for this person that they never even deserved, you know? And so we're really just setting ourselves up for repeating our past if we hold any expectation, or we're latching on to the future if we're creating expectations that are higher than, right? So that's kind of how I usually would approach things like that, is like, just number one, we have to come into all of our circumstances with a complete clean slate and give everybody the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, where are you? Put it on the table, and let's see the true face value of where we're both operating at. And if there's still something that exists, right, as an attachment or as an expectation, if we choose to engage in a relationship at that point, right, then it's just about being honest and transparent, right, and just communication and saying, hey, look, this is where I am, and that's, yet again, this is where I'm at, and this includes certain expectations that I'm aware that I'm working on and trying to dissolve. I know that it's not about you. So if you feel comfortable working with me at that level, so that we can both take responsibility without blame, without finger pointing, then would we both like to move forward? So that way we can assist each other in growing rather than challenge each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, the projection, that just keeps coming back, because Denise and I have talked about that many times, of people mirror back to us what we still need to heal, and how we don't even mean to, but we're always projecting onto each other, especially, in relationship, an intimate relationship. And so, if we could even condense this to one thing that our viewers could work on in helping each other get past this idea of oppression, it would be to be very aware of how we project onto each other, I think, and just working with that will do a lot.
That's perfect. Like, to bring it as simply put, like, simply full circle, is basically anytime that you want to, I'll give you a visual so you can actually energetically too, but it's like, anytime you do this, anytime you do this, just go like this and turn it back around. It doesn't mean, and the big thing with that is, like, you have to be very careful about not shaming yourself, because that defeats the whole purpose of doing that. And that's the biggest thing to just be aware of while we're taking full responsibility, is that you don't take responsibility and say, oh my God, it's my fault. Like, oh, like, man, I'm like, I can't do anything right, or why, like, everything's my fault. It's not like that. It's more like, okay, so Jess, like, I don't know why we're having such discord, but obviously I'm going to look into why I'm inviting that into my life, and whether or not you're even, if you're valid for me, like, because obviously everything that you're experiencing is valid. It doesn't mean I have to agree with it, but if you're presenting something that's, even if it's triggering to me, like, especially if it's triggering to me, like, then I look at it and say, okay, there's something there that I need to learn. So even if I don't like what you're saying and I don't like your energy, there's truth to it. So I have to sift through that and say, my responsibility is to take everything that's given to me for my highest growth and not try and change anyone else or project anything onto anyone else, you know, and that would be taking the finger and turning it back around in a productive fashion. So you could yell at me all day long, and if I'm in my right reference and if I'm centered, I would be like, wow, that's interesting. Why am I inviting this into my life? Like, what pattern of mine do I need to address so I invite better things into my life that feel better, you know, without needing to chase anything, right? Because obviously there's an unresolved pattern between us where apparently I still enjoy being yelled at and I like being devalued. So that's my problem, right? So I need to heal that and make proper choices from that point to create the boundary and then move into a new life where I meet people that reflect value and just beauty and mutual respect and reciprocity. And then guess what? Then I don't need boundaries anymore, because now I just invited all the beautiful people into my life that want to operate on that same level, right?
I feel like part of what we're talking about here is really describes how do you step out of that victim role, right? We have been so conditioned to be victims, and really it's about taking ownership for ourselves, for our experience in life, good, bad, indifferent, and saying, how did I co-create this? What's showing up? What do I need to resolve? And it's such a more empowering space than having it be all about the other person. It's all about you. You did this to me. No, on some level, I've co-created this for myself. So what's mine to own, and I get to choose at any point in time what I accept and don't accept. So you said that so beautifully. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate how you shared that as well, because yeah, it's really nice to hear it in that context as well, because that's very, very true about us. Obviously, yeah, like we're creating the dynamic that we're experiencing with what we're bringing into it. So yeah, it's very well said.
Well, I'm wondering, so Denise, is there anything that you feel like we didn't cover that you would like to ask Travis while we have him here?
I think like we covered a wide range of things today. I feel like we covered everything that I had kind of been thinking on, and so yeah.
Anything from you, Travis, that feels like you want to, you know, anything else that you'd like to share about anything?
Actually, one thing that I would share is something that's been probably one of my more recent stages that I've moved into, which is, you know, to some people it might be a stretch, but it's very simple. And for others, it almost would kind of be like, oh, wow, yeah, I knew that the whole time. But none of us are broken. So the biggest thing is none of us are broken. And even though we may be going through an internal healing process that allows us to create our own heaven on earth here, or our own wholeness, even though we're going through that, if we just simply allow it to exist and happen on its own, it will. We don't need to force it. We don't need to guide it. We don't have to do anything, really. We can just support it and kind of help move it along a little bit, nudge it. But that's really about it. And with that being said, there's no effort involved. Like there's no, you know, I mean, there's no need to change anything or push it along. You're not going to miss out. Like you're already here and you're already doing everything. So with that being said, when we do run into situations with triggers and trying to navigate how do we move through life with others and have our discernment, what I've been moving into a little bit more so is just fully understanding, like from an alignment standpoint, because if we're all fully whole, and if we're all exactly as we're meant to be, and there's nothing more to change and there's nothing more to do, whenever we do this, there's really nothing to address except, oh wow, I don't fit here anymore. So then I can say, oh wow, okay, like I don't even have to analyze what's going on with us. I can just be like, oh, wow, this isn't working. Like, that's great. Like, you're different. You're unique in your expression. I'm unique in my expression. We just don't go together. So I love you, and cool. I'm gonna go let life take me where I need to be, and I'm gonna have all the beauty around me that I deserve. And you're going to be able to do the same thing, because I'm not going to latch onto you and try and figure out how do we heal each other, because all that's going to do is create the oppression. So if we just acknowledge we're all perfect anyhow, whenever we have discord, we can just be like, oh, wow, okay, cool, thanks. No thanks. You know, I love you. I allow both of us to move towards our best purposes in life with the best people possible by not latching onto each other. So that makes it so much easier, I think, to navigate all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like people are going to want to contact you, Travis. Do you think, if they do, I'm just putting this out here, if people listening are like, I really resonate with what he has to say, I kind of want to connect with him, how can they do that? What's the best way to do that?
Well, I'm pretty much in terms of any sort of platforms. I'm very bare boned on that right now. So it's really just social media. You know, you can just reach out. Facebook is probably the best thing, like on Messenger. You're always welcome to shoot me a message. I'm trying to think. I do have an Instagram. I just kind of play around with that. I don't really, yeah. So other than that, Facebook's probably the best. Otherwise, you can try and ask for my number from someone. I don't know. That's probably the best way to do it, right? But yeah, it'll happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll happen the way it's meant to. But Facebook's really conducive for that. I'm always available, and I'll catch a message and I'll get back. You know, it's obviously whenever I'm able to.
Awesome. Anything else, Denise? What about anything from you?
No, just a huge thank you, Travis. This was a great conversation, and I feel like there were so many juicy pieces of conversation that people will be able to allow in their lives and just to kind of think on. And so thank you for this.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate you too inviting me. Yeah, this is literally like my first legit live that I've done with well, not live, but first, you know what I mean. First recording I've done with anyone on anything. So yeah, it's pretty fun to play along, and I really hope at least that even though we covered a variety of different topics, I hope that they were practical enough or straightforward enough to be able to actually link, see how they all fit together in this whole process, because they're all very pertinent. So I appreciate you you both actually wanting to have a conversation about all of this, and to even listen and hold space for me to share. So it's very valuable to me. So I appreciate you too.
Thanks, Trav. So good to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.